A billionaire came home unexpectedly and cried when he saw what the black maid did for his father. Part 1. The quiet keeper Grace Williams had been cleaning houses for 23 years, and she'd learned long ago that invisibility was part of the job. People didn't want to see you. They wanted to see the results of your work. Polished floors, folded linens, a home that felt cared for without anyone having to think about who did the caring. She arrived at the Hartwell estate every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 in the morning sharp. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking the valley, all white columns and sprawling gardens that someone else maintained. Grace's domain was inside 12 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a kitchen bigger than her entire apartment. But her real job, the one that mattered most, was taking care of Mr. Edwin. Edwin Hartwell was 87 years old, a widower who'd built an empire in real estate before age and illness slowed him down. His son, Michael Hartwell, ran the business, now traveling constantly, closing deals in cities Grace had only seen on television. Michael visited maybe once every few months, staying just long enough to sign papers and ask his father surface-level questions before flying out again. Grace had worked for the family for 5 years, but she'd only met Michael twice. Both times, he barely looked at her. A polite nod, a distracted thank you as he rushed past with his phone pressed to his ear. That was fine with Grace. She wasn't there for him. Mr. Edwin spent most of his days in the sunroom, wrapped in blankets even during summer, staring out at the garden with eyes that held 1,000 memories. The nursing staff came twice daily to check his medications and vitals, but they moved with clinical efficiency in and out in 20 minutes. Grace stayed longer. She brought him tea the way he liked it, with honey and a splash of cream. She read him the newspaper, doing all the voices for the comic strips until he smiled. She sat with him in comfortable silence when words felt too heavy. Some days, he called her by his late wife's name. Grace never corrected him. Part 2. The weight of loneliness. On a Wednesday morning in late October, Grace found Mr. Edwin crying. She'd just finished vacuuming the upstairs hallway when she heard it, a soft, broken sound coming from his bedroom. Her heart clenched. She set down her supplies and knocked gently before entering. He sat on the edge of his bed, still in his pajamas, holding a photograph in trembling hands. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "Mr. Edwin?" Grace approached slowly, her voice soft as a prayer. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes, lost and small in a way that broke something deep inside her chest. "I can't remember her voice anymore," he whispered. "Catherine, my wife. I can see her face, but I can't hear her." Grace sat beside him on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. She looked at the photograph, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, standing in front of this very house decades ago. "Tell me about her," Grace said. "Tell me what she loved." And he did. For the next hour, Mr. Edwin talked about Catherine, how she hummed while cooking, how she danced barefoot in the kitchen, how she'd saved every birthday card he ever gave her. Grace listened to every word, absorbing his memories like they were sacred texts. When the nurse arrived for the morning medication check, she found them still sitting together, the old man's head resting on Grace's shoulder. The nurse, a stern woman named Patricia, frowned. "Mrs. Williams, you have work to do." Grace stood slowly, squeezing Mr. Edwin's hand. "I know my job, ma'am." But as she returned to her cleaning, something shifted inside her. This wasn't just about dusting furniture or mopping floors anymore. This man was lonely, desperately, achingly lonely. And while she couldn't bring back his wife or make his son visit more often, she could do something. She could make sure he didn't feel invisible. That afternoon, Grace stopped at a thrift store on her way home. She found what she was looking for in the music section: old vinyl records from the 1950s and 60s. Big band music. Jazz standards. The kind of songs people danced to when they were young, and the world felt full of possibility. She bought 6 records with money she'd been saving for new work shoes. Part 3. Small acts of love. The next morning, Grace arrived at the estate carrying a small portable record player she borrowed from her neighbor. It was old and scratched, but it worked. She found Mr. Edwin in the sunroom, staring blankly at the garden. The October light filtered through the windows, golden and melancholy. "Good morning," she said, setting down the record player on the side table. "I brought you something." His eyes focused slowly, curious. "What's that?" "Music," Grace said simply. She pulled out one of the records, Glenn Miller's orchestra. "I thought maybe, if you can't remember her voice, we could remember the song she might have loved." She placed the needle on the record, and suddenly the room filled with the warm, nostalgic sound of Moonlight Serenade. Mr. Edwin's face transformed. His eyes widened, then filled with tears, but this time they weren't sad tears. "Catherine loved this song," he breathed. "We danced to it at our wedding." Grace smiled. "Then let's dance." "I can't stand for long." "Who said anything about standing?" She took his hands and gently swayed them back and forth in time with the music, right there in his chair. And for 3 minutes and 28 seconds, Edwin Hartwell wasn't a lonely old man in a too-big house. He was young again, dancing with the woman he loved. From that day forward, music became part of their routine. Grace would play records while she cleaned nearby, and Mr. Edwin would tell her stories about each song, where he was when he first heard it, what Catherine was wearing, how the world felt back then. She started bringing him small things. A flower from her own garden, a picture her grandson drew, the Sunday comics, which she'd read aloud in exaggerated voices until he laughed. Grace also noticed things the nursing staff didn't. She saw how he struggled to button his shirts, so she quietly replaced them with soft pullovers. She noticed he barely touched the bland meals the cook prepared, so she started bringing homemade soup, her grandmother's recipe, rich with love and spices. She saw how he perked up when she talked about her own life, her 2 grown children, her 5 grandchildren, the little community garden where she volunteered on weekends. So she shared more, turning their time together into real conversations instead of one-sided care. The nursing staff noticed the changes too. Patricia, the stern nurse, pulled Grace aside one afternoon. "Whatever you're doing," Patricia said, her voice softer than usual, "keep doing it. His blood pressure is better. He's eating more. I've been his nurse for 2 years, and I've never seen him this alive." Grace just nodded, but inside, her heart swelled. Part 4. The breaking point was a cold Friday in November when everything changed. Grace arrived to find a strange car in the driveway. A Cadillac, sleek black sedan with rental plates. Her stomach tightened with instinct. Visitors usually meant complications. Inside, she found Michael Hartwell in his father's study, barking into his phone while rifling through paperwork. He'd aged since she last saw him, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his mouth. Success looked exhausting on him. "I don't care what the contract says. Make it work," he snapped into the phone. Then he noticed Grace standing in the doorway. "Oh, you're the maid." "Yes, sir." "Grace Williams." He waved dismissively. "Right. Listen, I'm working from here for a few days. I'll need coffee brought to this office every 2 hours. Black, no sugar. And keep the noise down, I have conference calls." "Of course," Grace said quietly. "Will you be spending time with your father?" Michael's jaw tightened. "That's not really your concern, is it?" Grace bit back, the words burning on her tongue. Instead, she simply nodded and went to find Mr. Edwin. He was in the sunroom, but something was wrong. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. The record player sat silent. Grace always waited until she arrived to play it. "Mr. Edwin?" She knelt beside his chair. "Are you feeling okay?" "My son is here," he said softly, and there was such sadness in his voice it nearly broke her. "He's been here 3 hours. He hasn't come to see me yet." Grace's hands curled into fists. "I'm sure he will. He's probably just busy. He's always busy." Edwin's voice cracked. "I'm dying, Grace. The doctors told me months ago. And my son can't spare 10 minutes to sit with his father." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Dying. She'd known he was frail, but dying. Why hadn't anyone told her? "Because you're just a maid," a bitter voice whispered in her mind. "You're not family. You don't get to know." Grace swallowed her anger and took his hand. "Then I'll sit with you. For as long as you need." She stayed with him through lunch, playing his favorite records and reading the newspaper. When Michael's assistant came looking for coffee, Grace asked her to fetch it herself. Grace was busy. That evening, as Grace prepared to leave, she overheard Michael on the phone in the hallway. "The old man's lawyer wants me to review his will." "I know. It's a waste of time, ... Look, I'll put him in a proper facility next month. This house is too much, and clearly the staff isn't adequate. The maid? I don't know. She seems fine. She's just a help. Just a help." Grace stood frozen. Something cold and hard settling in her chest. She thought about those words all night. Part 5. A daughter's resolve. Grace didn't sleep well. She kept seeing Mr. Edwin's face, the way he'd looked when he said his son hadn't visited him. The resignation in his voice, like he'd accepted being forgotten. By Saturday morning, something had crystallized inside her. She'd spent 23 years cleaning up after other people, staying invisible, accepting her place. But this wasn't about her pride or her place. This was about a kind, lonely man dying in a house full of expensive things, but empty of love. She arrived at the estate with a plan forming in her mind. Michael was still there, still locked in his study with his laptop and phone. Grace brought him coffee black, no sugar, as requested, and asked as casually as she could, "Will you be joining your father for lunch today, sir?" "Probably not. I have a meeting at noon." "I see." Grace paused at the door. "He talks about you often, you know. He's very proud of you." Michael glanced up, something flickering across his face, guilt, maybe, or irritation at being reminded. "That's nice. Thank you." Grace nodded and left, her plan solidifying. She found Mr. Edwin in his usual spot. Today, he seemed even more fragile, his skin almost translucent in the morning light. But when he saw Grace, he smiled. "There's my girl," he said softly. "I'm here," Grace said, kneeling beside him. "And I was thinking, why don't we do something special today? Let's make this sunroom beautiful, like it used to be when Miss Catherine was here." His eyes lit up. Catherine loved flowers. She had vases everywhere. Then let's bring the flowers back. Grace spent her lunch break driving to 3 different stores. She bought fresh flowers, sunflowers, daisies, roses, and pretty vases. She used her own money, knowing she couldn't expense it, not caring. She also bought picture frames and a corkboard. Back at the estate, she transformed the sunroom. She arranged flowers throughout the space, filling it with color and life. She hung the photographs Mr. Edwin kept in his drawers, pictures of Catherine, of Michael as a child, of family moments frozen in time. She pinned his grandchildren's drawings and old birthday cards to the corkboard. She played Glenn Miller on the record player while she worked. And Mr. Edwin watched with tears streaming down his face. "It looks like home again," he whispered. Grace also did something else. She set up her phone on a shelf. Her daughter had taught her how to use the video function, and she recorded. Not secretly, but openly, with Mr. Edwin's permission. She recorded him talking about his life, his memories, his love for his wife. She recorded him sharing advice he'd never gotten to give his son. She recorded the truth of his loneliness and the small joys that music and flowers brought him. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Grace smiled gently. "Because your story matters, Mr. Edwin, and sometimes people need to see the truth before they can understand it." Part 6. The Confrontation. Sunday morning, Michael finally came to see his father. Grace was playing records in the sunroom when he walked in, stopping short at the transformation. His eyes moved over the flowers, the photographs, the evidence of care and attention. "What is all this?" he asked. "Your father's favorite things," Grace said simply. "I thought he deserved to be surrounded by beauty." Michael's jaw tightened. "I don't recall authorizing you to redecorate." "You didn't," Grace said, meeting his eyes. "I did it anyway." For a moment, they stared at each other, the billionaire businessman and the housekeeper, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Mr. Edwin spoke, his voice weak but clear. "Michael, son, sit with me." Michael's expression softened fractionally. He sat in the chair across from his father, but his body language was stiff, uncomfortable. "How are you feeling, Dad?" "Dying," Edwin said bluntly. "But you know that, don't you?" Michael flinched. "The doctor said you have time." "Time for what?" Edwin's eyes held a sharpness Grace hadn't seen before. "Time to sit alone in this house while you close deals on the other side of the country? Time to wait for visits that never come?" "Dad, that's not fair. I'm running your company. I don't care about the company." The outburst seemed to drain Edwin's energy, and he sagged back in his chair. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I just wanted my son." The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the record player. Grace moved toward the door to give them privacy, but Edwin reached out. "Stay, Grace. Please." She stayed. Michael looked between them, something dawning in his expression. "How long has this been going on?" 5 years, Edwin said. "Grace has worked here for 5 years. She knows more about my life, my memories, my late wife than you do. She sits with me, talks with me, makes me feel like I still matter." "You do matter." "Then why haven't you been here?" Edwin's voice cracked. "I'm your father, Michael. I held you when you were born. I taught you to ride a bike, to drive, to be a man. And now, when I need you most, you're too busy." Michael's face had gone pale. "I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize," Grace said quietly. Both men looked at her, and she continued, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I'm just a maid, Mr. Hartwell. I know that, but I see things. I see a lonely man who lights up when someone simply sits with him. I see a father who still keeps every picture of his son, who talks about you with such pride it breaks my heart." She pulled out her phone. "I recorded something. With your father's permission. I think you need to see it." Part 7. The Reckoning. Grace handed Michael her phone, the video queued up. He hesitated, then pressed play. On the screen, Edwin Hartwell sat in his chair by the window, afternoon light painting him in gold. Grace's voice came from off-camera, gentle and encouraging. "Tell me about Michael when he was young." Edwin's face transformed, years falling away as he smiled. "Oh, he was something. Curious about everything. Catherine used to say he'd ask why until we ran out of answers." He laughed softly. "When he was 7, he decided he wanted to build me a house. Not a toy house, a real one. He drew up blueprints on notebook paper, complete with a swimming pool and a room just for ice cream." The video continued. Edwin shared story after story: Michael's first business venture selling lemonade, his high school graduation, the day he took over the company. Pride and love radiated from every word. Then the tone shifted. Edwin's smile faded. "I know he's busy," he said to the camera, his voice heavy with resignation. "I know running the business is hard. I did it for 40 years. But I wish he knew that I don't need grand gestures. I don't need expensive gifts or fancy dinners. I just need him to sit with me, to talk to me, to see me before I'm gone. His voice broke. I'm scared, Grace. I'm scared of dying alone in this big house. And I'm scared that my son will spend the rest of his life regretting that he didn't come home when he had the chance. Tears rolled down Edwin's weathered cheeks. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm proud of him. Tell him it's okay to slow down, to let go, to just be my son instead of the man running my empire. Tell him before it's too late. The video ended. In the sunroom, Michael sat frozen, phone trembling in his hands. Tears streamed down his face, silent at first, then accompanied by broken, gasping sobs. He covered his mouth with one hand, his whole body shaking. Dad, he choked out. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Edwin reached out with a shaking hand, and Michael took it, falling to his knees beside his father's chair. He pressed his forehead against his father's hand and wept like a child. I got so caught up, Michael sobbed. I thought I was honoring you by growing the company, by being successful. I thought that's what you wanted. I wanted my son, Edwin whispered, his own tears falling. I just wanted my son. Grace backed quietly toward the door, her own vision blurred. This wasn't her moment. But Edwin called out, Grace, wait. She turned. Thank you, Edwin said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing me, for caring when no one else did, for loving an old man who wasn't even your family. Grace's composure finally cracked. You are family, Mr. Edwin. You've been family to me for a long time. Michael looked up at her, his face ravaged by tears and realization. You did this. You brought him flowers, music, joy. You gave him what I should have been giving him. I just did what felt right, Grace said softly. No, Michael said, standing slowly. You did what love looks like. Real, everyday, unglamorous love. And you did it for minimum wage while I was too blind and too busy to see my own father suffering. He looked at his father, then back at Grace. Something shifting in his expression, shame, gratitude, and determination all at once. That changes now, he said. Everything changes now. Part 8. Coming home, Michael canceled his meetings. All of them. For the next 3 weeks, he stayed at the estate. Not locked in the study with his laptop, but present. Truly present. He had breakfast with his father every morning. He sat in the sunroom reading the newspaper aloud, attempting to comic strip voices the way Grace did, making Edwin laugh at his terrible impressions. He called his own children and brought them to visit their grandfather. The house filled with the sound of young voices and laughter, and Edwin glowed with joy at every moment. Grace watched it all unfold, her heart full and aching at the same time. This was what she'd hoped for, what Mr. Edwin deserved. But she also knew her role had changed. She'd crossed an invisible line. And now she waited for the consequences. They came on a Tuesday morning when Michael asked to speak with her privately. Grace's stomach tightened as she followed him to the study. This was it. She'd overstepped. She'd be let go, probably with some severance pay and a polite but firm dismissal. Michael closed the door and turned to face her. Grace, I need to be honest with you. She braced herself. Yes, sir. I looked into your employment file. You make $14 an hour. You've been cleaning this house 3 days a week for 5 years, and you've never asked for a raise. You've never complained. You've just shown up and done the work. Grace said nothing. But you did more than the work, Michael continued, his voice thick. You loved my father when I didn't. You saw his humanity when I only saw my own ambition. You gave him dignity and joy with your own money, your own time, your own heart. He paused, swallowing hard. I can never repay what you've done, but I want to try. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "This is a new contract. You're being hired as my father's full-time companion and caregiver at a salary of $75,000 a year, plus full health benefits and a retirement plan. You'll still help maintain the house if you want, but your primary job is simply to be with him, to do what you've already been doing." Grace stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. "Mr. Hartwell, there's more." Michael's eyes were wet. "When my father passes, and I pray that's not soon, you'll receive a portion of his estate. He's already changed his will. He wants to make sure you're taken care of, the way you took care of him." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "I didn't do this for money." "I know," Michael said softly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man transformed by grief and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "But the greatest payment has already been seeing him happy. Seeing you come home." Michael stepped forward and, to Grace's surprise, pulled her into a hug. "Thank you for being the daughter I failed to be as a son. Thank you for teaching me what really matters." The weeks that followed were golden. Edwin grew weaker, but he was surrounded by love. Michael worked from home, only traveling when absolutely necessary and always returning quickly. Grace continued bringing flowers and playing music. But now Michael joined in, learning his father's favorite songs, asking about memories he'd never taken the time to know. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside, Edwin called them both to his bedside. His breathing was labored, his body frail, but his eyes were clear and bright. "Michael," he said, taking his son's hand, "you came home. You really came home." "I should have done it sooner," Michael said, tears flowing freely. "I'm so sorry it took me so long." "You're here now," Edwin whispered. "That's what matters." He turned to Grace. "And you, my dear Grace, you taught an old man that he was still worth loving. You gave me music and flowers and conversation when I thought the world had forgotten me. You were my angel." "You were mine too," Grace said, holding his other hand. Edwin smiled, peaceful and ready. "I'm not afraid anymore. Catherine's waiting for me, and I got to say goodbye to everyone I love. That's more than most people get." He passed away 3 days later, surrounded by family, with Glenn Miller playing softly in the background at the funeral. Michael stood before the gathered mourners and spoke about his father's legacy, not the business empire, but the man himself, his kindness, his humor, his capacity for love. "My father taught me many things," Michael said, his voice steady despite his tears. "But the greatest lesson came at the end of his life, taught not by him, but by a humble woman named Grace Williams. She taught me that success means nothing if you're too busy to love the people who matter. That wealth is worthless if you don't use it to bring joy to others. That the most important work we can do is simply showing up for each other with open hearts." He looked directly at Grace, sitting in the front row with her family. "Grace saw my father when I couldn't. She loved him when I was too distracted. She gave him dignity and joy at minimum wage, asking for nothing in return. She is the embodiment of everything good and right in this world. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the lesson she taught me." The crowd turned to look at Grace, and she felt the weight of their eyes, some curious, some moved, all seeing her in a way she'd never been seen before, not invisible, not just the help, but human, worthy, essential. After the service, as people shared memories and consoled each other, Michael's daughter, a young woman Grace had met only briefly, approached her. "Miss Grace," she said softly, "my dad told me what you did for Grandpa, how you made his last months beautiful." Grace began, but the young woman interrupted. "You showed us what we'd forgotten. You reminded us that people matter more than anything else. My dad's different now. He comes home for dinner. He asks about my life. He's present." Tears filled her eyes. You didn't just give Grandpa a gift. You gave us back our father." Grace hugged her, both women crying, and in that moment, Grace understood the full weight of what had happened. She hadn't just cared for a lonely old man. She'd sparked a transformation that would ripple through generations. That evening, as Grace returned to her small apartment, she found a letter waiting for her, the final message from Edwin Hartwell, written weeks before his death. "Dear Grace," it read in shaky handwriting. "By the time you read this, I'll be dancing with Catherine again. But I wanted you to know that my final months were the happiest I'd been since she died. You gave me music, flowers, laughter, and dignity. You made me feel seen. You are proof that the greatest power in this world isn't money or status. It's love. Simple, everyday, unglamorous love. Thank you for showing my son what really matters. Thank you for being my friend. You changed everything. With all my love and gratitude, Edwin." Grace folded the letter carefully and placed it in her Bible, next to the verses about loving your neighbor and showing kindness to strangers. She thought about her 23 years of cleaning houses, of staying invisible, of accepting her place, and she realized that she'd never been invisible at all. She'd been exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what the world needed, one small act of love at a time. Outside her window, snow continued to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in gentle grace.